Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Ohele Avotenu, Tents of Our Fathers. This week's Torah portion, Parshat Mishpatim, is one of my all-time favorites, and it is one of the ones that helped me to understand how much I really do not like what's happening in the United States government and in politics in this country. So, yeah, let's dive right in. And obviously, this is commentary, so take it or leave it, but this is the way I see things. The United States government is functioning like a bad polygamist, okay? And it is violating or allowing to be violated most of the principles here in this passage in such a way that everybody's angry. And everybody's looking to their neighbor as somehow the enemy that needs to be defeated, and it's not good, right? So I'm gonna first go to a passage in Leviticus, and then we'll come back to this portion. So in Leviticus 18, there's a passage which in the English that I've chosen for today reads, "And you shall not marry a woman in addition to her sister as a second wife while she is alive to uncover her nakedness." Well, this reads like a pretty good blanket prohibition, at least in your English, but in the Hebrew, there's an interesting word there. It actually, some translations will render it as a rival or as a competitor. But the Hebrew word is litzror, right, which is related to the Hebrew word from which we get the word Mitzrayim, to bind up, to cramp, to cause distress, oppress, to be in a narrow strait, those kinds of things. So the idea of what does that mean? Well, coming back to our primary portion, we read in Exodus 21 verses 10 and 11, "If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, clothing, or her conjugal rights. But if he will not do these three things for her, then she shall go free for nothing without payment of money." So what does this mean? This means that if you take on the responsibility of another covenantal partner, we're talking either wives, or in my case, my opinion about the United States government, you're not allowed to reduce the food, clothing, and marriage rights of your extant partner, the wife you already have. So we have this notion of taking rivals and taking additional and reducing rights from the one to give to another. And it's a compound condition, and it's something that Yeshua the Messiah also spoke against. He spoke about this compound condition as, the conditions by which a man is violating the Torah when it comes to marriage and remarriage. The idea that you send your one woman away, you deny her marriage rights for no cause, no just reason, and then you take another, right? So you're reducing the rights of one, and or denying them entire, and then giving them to someone else. It's not okay. So what we have in the United States, if it read like a relationship drama, if you were to put the United States government as a character in this drama and consider how this is unfolding, I think pretty much everybody would counsel you to get a divorce from this guy. So you marry this dude, right? And he makes a bunch of promises. He's going to lead you. He's going to protect you. He's going to make sure that um, your work and your retirement are set, right? He's gonna honor the investments that you make, and the labor that you put into the household and the relationship. But then he starts taking out a bunch of credit cards in your name, right? And working up a whole bunch of debt that he expects you to pay back. And he's not going to work. His work, he figures, is being in charge and telling you what to do, and making policies that will govern your life. And he's like, well, your opinion matters. I will let you vote on house policy. And you're like, all right, well, so long as my vote, holds weight, and so on and so forth. But then you come home one day, and there's a bunch of other women in his bed, right? Maybe they came across the border. Maybe they overstayed their welcome in the house. And you're like, hey, you know, what are all these other women doing here? And he's like, well, they snuck into my bed, and now that they're here, I've got to take care of them, right? They've asked me to be their husband. They've asked me to pay their bills. They've asked me to do those things and give them housing and medical and all this stuff. And you're like, but okay, I guess, but how are we going to pay for that? We're already in debt. And he's like, well, I'm just going to take more of what you're earning, right? And I'm going to take out more debt, and then you're going to be paying interest on the debt that I've already taken out, and I'm going to be taking out more debt. And in fact, I'm going to start giving them the right to help set policy of the house. And the more of them that come in, the less you get to decide on what happens, because they're also going to have a say. But don't worry, I'll put them to work too, and I will start taking money from them as well. And he doesn't stop there, right? He doesn't stop at that place. He starts pitting you against one another, right? He starts making promises to you saying, well, I'm going to uphold these rights, and I'm going to stop her or them from doing X, Y, and Z. But then he turns around to the other one, and or other ones, and says, well, she's just not right in the head. She doesn't care about you. She's not willing to be welcoming, and we need to defeat her unwelcoming agenda. So we need to make sure that there are enough of you to overpower the vote that she has. And so now the guy is pitting the relationships against one another. He's pitting these women against each other in his home. He's working them all. He's taxing them all. He's taking more and more and more debt out in their name, and he's pitting them against one another. And what do I mean by pitting them against one another? Okay. Well, if we're going to hold the analogy of the United States government, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, say, and you're sitting there and you're voting for this or that party, generally speaking, the other party has said their intent is to defeat you, right? So whatever president you get, if you get a Republican president or a Republican cabinet, and they've been telling their constituents that, well, we've just got to defeat those Democrats. Then if you're a Democrat, you're sitting there and it's like, hey, wait a minute. I want a leader who's going to uphold my rights. That doesn't mean I necessarily want somebody else's rights trampled, but I do want a leader that's going to uphold mine. And if you're on the other side, and you're voting for that Democrat leader, and that Democrat leader is like, well, we got to stop these Republicans. They're just, hateful, or whatever the case may be. then again, you're sitting there as a Republican saying, well, what about my rights? What about my voice? What about my opinion? What about my preference? What about my agency? And either way you slice it, you have one half of the country, one half of the House, which is being pitted against the other. And it's like, who's the villain in this story? I mean, if this was somebody's husband or boyfriend, tell me who wouldn't counsel the woman or women involved to get a divorce, right? Who wouldn't counsel them to say, "Hey, man, this guy is a real piece of work, and he's not doing right by you." And we're not just talking about immigration. I mean, let's look at another bit in this particular passage. Um, it starts off Exodus 21 verse 2 says, "If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the seventh year, or on the seventh, he shall leave as a free man without payment to you." So you're, yeah, and we tell people we've abolished slavery in this country, right? Oh yeah, we've abolished slavery. Um, what's the difference between slavery, indentured servitude, garnished wages, or student loan debt? Student loan debt is probably my all-time favorite for this particular example because, on the one hand, you have all these conservatives that are opposed to student loan debt, but they cling to the Bible and they're like, hey, student loan debt, or student loan debt forgiveness, I should say. They're opposed to student loan debt forgiveness. And it's like, well, here it says that somebody who's been working for 6 years as a slave is supposed to go out free. So if we've abolished slavery, and even according to this principle, a slave should be able to go out free from their debt after 6 years, or in the Jubilee, or whatever biblical passage you want to cling to, why then do you oppose student loan debt forgiveness, right? Because it's not forgiveness, okay? Somebody has to pay the bill. And again, going back to the two wives analogy, if you have, you know, the husband say to the one wife, "Well, I'm going to give you $500,000, and if you don't pay it off after 6 years, um, well, since I can't float that, I'm just going to take it out of the bank accounts of all my other wives, right? I'll forgive you the debt, but everybody else has to pay." And it's like, so do you rob the one woman of justice by, keeping her trapped in this loan forever? No, that's not right. But do you rob all the other women of justice by saying, well, I did this crazy thing and now you all have to pay for it? That's also not right. So what we have is this crazy polygamous government who has a covenantal responsibility to each and every one of its citizens, and seems hell-bent on pitting our rights against one another, on robbing some of us to pay for funds for other people, and has no incentive and no checks and balances towards physical responsibility, towards actually protecting the rights of everyone involved. And we are constantly being placed in a position where the way it's framed is, if you don't like the way he's running things, it's not his fault. No, it's that other woman, it's that rival wife. She's the problem, right? Or you're the problem, or both. But it's never his fault. It's gaslighting. It's insane. Um, just another example. And if you haven't actually crunched the numbers, I highly recommend you do it. But when you have people that are arguing the difference between whether or not we should increase, minimum wage, and what that looks like and what that means and what that will do to the economy, and is it right for people to want to have a livable wage? The problem is the way the system is set up. It's going to not only be bad for one party, but it's going to be bad for both. And here's what I mean. Let's take the argument to an extreme example, what I like to call the $1 million cheeseburger. Or for ease of things, let's just say well, yeah, let's stick with the $1 million cheeseburger. Um, when you're trying to create a livable wage, right? But your money isn't backed by anything, and you have people that are living off of their retirement, you're in a real pickle. Because if, let's just say, you decided that a livable wage, everybody could live off of $1 million an hour. $1 million an hour. First off, you make that the minimum wage. It's not even a good salary. It's just the bottom of the stack. So that's minimum. You sit there, and what comes of the price, points in all your stores, right? What does a hamburger cost? What does a value meal at McDonald's become? And if you're sitting there as someone who's like, we're just going to pay everybody so that they've got a living wage and a livable wage and all those kinds of things, great. But what happens to the people that have already done their work? They're old, or no longer able to compete in the market due to physical ailments or whatever, but they're living off of their retirement savings, right? So they worked for 40 years, and they're sitting there, and they've got, say, $1 million in the bank saved up for their retirement. And it's supposed to last them for the next 5 years, maybe 10, depending on how frugal they are. But you raise the minimum wage up to $1 million an hour. Well, how long will their retirement savings last them in that new economy? And the problem is, it will drive up the cost of living for the people that are now making $1 million an hour, because everything that they want to do is more expensive as well. Now you might say, well, that's just a ridiculous extreme example. Well, sure, maybe it is. But it's meant to highlight the basic problem and why there's a tension. And when you contemplate the fact that our money used to actually be money, it used to be backed by commodities. We had silver dollars, we had gold-backed dollars, and those kinds of things. You look at the federal minimum wage of 1964, and it was $1.25 an hour. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. Well, if you look at the price of silver, and you actually go and contemplate how much a $1.25 an hour is worth today, you might realize that not only are the people who are advocating for a living minimum wage in California and all these other places, not only are they undershooting the value that they're asking for by a good margin, right? The federal minimum wage of 1964 was worth far more than what I've heard advocated for in any state. Though I can say that I'm not fully up on all the debates. It's been a while. But fixing the number is not going to is not going to change anything without fixing the money itself, right? So is it the young people that are trying to plan their lives that are in a bad way, or is it the old people that have already done the work and they're in a bad way? Yes, the answer is yes, but it's not an old people who are in retirement, those old rich people that like, $5 million should be enough that are the problem. And it's not the young people that are like, I need more money to live that are the problem. They're both being pitted against one another by an abusive, neglectful, thieving, right? Gaslighting, bad polygamist of a government who is not looking after either of their rights and trying to pit them against one another. It's sick. Because as long as we are focused on that other woman who is, she's the problem, and if she weren't here, then everything would be okay. It's nonsense. Because the person who's making all these cracked decisions and is taking out credit in your name and and his buddy overseas keeps getting in fights and you have to pay the bail money to get him out of it, whatever buddy we're talking about. I love Israel. I support Israel. I do. And I will never apologize for that. But on the flip side, do I think or advocate for American treasure and soldiers to go overseas and be spent on the nation of Israel? No, I don't. I don't believe it should be done for Ukraine. I don't believe it should be done for Iraq and Afghanistan. Um, I think that there are better ways, like if I had my way, because we do have allies, we do, and we have policies which we all care about and policies which we don't care about. But if I had my way, I would recommend or I would advocate for a vote with your dollars policy, and say we had a policy where you're like, hey, I advocate for this social thing. It's like, okay, if there's enough of a vote to carry it, how much are you willing to fund it yourself, right? What amount of treasure and blood are you willing to put into this, rather than saying that you're going to vote for it, but somebody else is going to have to pay the bill in money or lifeblood. If Israel goes to war and they're fighting against this current generation of Amalek who wants to wipe out my people, and I want, as an American, and there's every legal reason to do so, and there isn't some reason why we can't get involved. I want to support them, then I should be able to vote to say yes. I think I would like to see this support going to Israel, that we sell them the munitions that they need, or whatever, whatever, whatever. And here is how much money I am going to send as a voluntary contribution to this effort. Or sign me up, I'll fly overseas and I will help pack medical supplies or do whatever it is that an untrained military or untrained non-military individual can do to help the cause. But to be in a position where I can vote somebody else's son off to war, or I can vote my way into somebody else's pocket and say, well, we are going to take your money to support the Jewish state, or we're going to take your money to support Ukraine, or we're going to take your money and go bring democracy to the Middle East for how many years and to what purpose? Well, honestly. Now I do know that my view might not be the most popular on this, but at the end of the day, put in relationship terms. If your husband, if the head of the house, we're all against the patriarchy these days, right? A lot of people are, me not so much. But if your house, your family was being run the way the United States government runs this house, like seriously, tell me who wouldn't advocate that you get up out of that situation? Who wouldn't call it abuse, right? It's crazy. But anyway, so it's not the money, that the minimum wage that people are asking for. They're not unreasonable to say they need a living wage. It's not the other people that say, but how can I afford that? I'm on my retirement. Neither of them are out of order. They're both being put in a bad way by a government that has robbed each generation and then turned around and tried to make it an issue between the generations. So, yeah, um, for the record, if I suddenly and mysteriously disappear under mysterious circumstances, um, I had no plans to mysteriously disappear. And yeah, but a lot of the terms in this particular passage have a lot of historical drama associated with them, and it makes it very difficult for people to actually just sit down and think about the principles of justice which underlie them. I highly recommend you meditate deeply on these principles, where they start, where they stop. Is it better to say that we have abolished slavery in this country, but we will put somebody under a lifelong term of servitude to interest payments on a student loan debt? Is that functionally better than saying that if somebody does something wrong and they're liable to pay, that they're going to be a slave for X amount of years, but in the sixth year they go out free? You know, the biblical stipulations are so different than what has been done historically. Uh, According to these passages, you're not allowed to just kidnap free people and turn them into slaves. Maybe we should talk to the IRS about that. You're not allowed to kidnap people and turn them into slaves. If you do, if you take a free person and deprive them of their liberty and lay claim to their labor and force them to work for you unjustly, it's a very severe penalty. And I highly recommend you look at what that is. No, in fact, you're not even allowed to beat your slave to the point where they lose a tooth or an eye. They immediately get their liberty at that point. So the things that were done historically in the American slave trade, the brutal abuses and perversely justified by people using biblical passages to say that somehow God was endorsing their abuses and their cruelty. It's just not true. But beyond it not being true, we do things which even the Bible, if you want to say, well, the Bible is reprehensible because it advocates for slavery, and then you turn around and say, well, we don't have slavery anymore because, we're more evolved. And then your version of non-slavery is outside of even the parameters of what was permissible in biblical slavery, maybe you should reevaluate your position, right? Like, you're not allowed to keep a Hebrew indebted to you in slavery for more than 6 years, right? But you can get someone into to paying off the student loan debt for the rest of their life, 50 years or more. If they can't pay it off, if the interest and everything just spirals out of control because, well, the economy and the job market and but they can't declare bankruptcy because, well, they keep the education. So is it right to keep them in bondage for all those years? Because we don't call it slavery, because it's about furthering their education. It's spin, man. It's spin. You call something by a different name, and then you do something that is worse than the named institution which you find so horrific. Just, I mean, come on, think about it, right? Um, anyway, don't be like the United States government. Don't be a bad polygamist, right? Um, yeah, and let don't let the systems gaslight you into thinking that they're treating you right because they're hammering the rights of somebody else. Don't let them gaslight you into the idea that it's okay for them to trample your rights for the compassion for another. If the United States government wants to take in X amount of refugees from other countries and so on and so forth, that's fine if they can pay for it, right? If they can pay for it without having to tax us more, without having to go into debt where we're going to have to pay off ever increasing amounts of interest and all this other stuff, and our children are going to be in bondage to pay more and more and more and more because of this crazy, abusive, um, unchecked ruler that keeps getting us to focus on the other side of the tent, the other women who just don't understand what he's doing to us. And if we could just get enough of his attention, and if we could just overpower them somehow, then there will be peace in the house because he'll finally be doing what I want. Yeah, yeah, that's nuts. Anyway, yeah, this is a great passage, full of justice, full of all sorts of meditations on guilt and liability, and not as a way to condemn people or make weird um, advocacy for really rotten institutions. But it's remarkable to me that a lot of the things that it talks about, you know, as in terms of injustice, it talks about polygamy. Well, we've made that illegal in this country. It talks about slavery. Well, we've made that illegal in this country. And yet we functionally do these things, but not the good versions, right? It's not the biblically um, ordained parameters on those things. We'll call our institutions by different names, but we'll enact the things that he specifically tells us not to do. And then the capitalists are looking at the socialists and be like, "You're the problem." The socialists are looking at the capitalists, "No, you're the problem." It's like, how come the economy's not working? Well, maybe it's because the money's broken. Maybe it has nothing to do with the capitalist or the socialist or this wife or that wife or the Democrat or the Republican. Maybe, just maybe, it's the mismanagement of of the house. Maybe it's that, you know. Um, but anyway, you're not supposed to take a rival, the word litzror, tzar, to create this, to bring this person on board to be the opposing force to the other person in your house, to play these women off each other and to deprive the one of rights so you can take the other. And then every few years deprive the other of the rights to kind of win back the good graces of the one. It's crazy manipulation. And here we are. Here we are. Yeah, nice cheery thoughts of the day, right? Anyway, Shabbat Shalom.